I told Alara Du Bois she went on that art retreat with Marc Riviere. I was gone. She laughed and called me paranoid. What she didn't know was that her casual mention of his name had already triggered something in my mind. She thought she was playing games, but I was about to show her what real strategy looks like. My name is Julian Beaumont. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent the last 25 years as Director of Procurement for Meridian Industries. When you control a $100 million annual budget, you learn to spot patterns, read between the lines, and trust your gut when something doesn't add up. Unfortunately, I applied those skills better to vendor negotiations than to my own marriage. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in October. Alara was loading the dishwasher, humming some tune I didn't recognize when she casually mentioned her weekend plans. Marc's organizing this amazing retreat in Napa Valley, she said, not looking up from the plates. Wine tasting, spa treatments, the whole 9 yards. I already booked my spot. Marc, that name had been popping up in her conversations more frequently over the past few months. Marc from her art class. Marc who understood her creative side. Marc who apparently had enough disposable income to organize weekend getaways for his students. Since when do you go on retreats with your art instructor? I asked, keeping my voice level. Alara finally looked at me, and I caught something in her expression. Defiance mixed with guilt. It was the same look her daughter Chloe Beaumont used to give me when she was 16 and testing boundaries. Julian, you're being paranoid, Alara said laughing. It's just a group of artists exploring wine country. Nothing scandalous about that. But the way she said scandalous told me she'd already thought about what might be scandalous. When you've negotiated with suppliers trying to hide cost overruns, you develop an ear for the words people choose when they're not telling the whole truth. I set down my coffee mug and looked directly at her. Alara, if you're planning to run around with this guy, I need you to know something. I'm gone. No discussions, no counseling, no second chances. I'm done. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a major contract falls through. That split second when you realize all your careful planning might have been for nothing. Alara's laugh came out sharp and forced. Oh, for crying out loud. Julian, you sound like some jealous teenager. Marc is a professional. I'm a married woman, and frankly your possessiveness is getting old. She turned back to the dishes, dismissing me like I was some vendor who'd overstayed his welcome. But I deliver my message, and in my business, you only say things once. After that, actions speak louder than words. That night, lying in bed while Alara scrolled through her phone beside me, I made a decision that would have made my military father proud. I wasn't going to beg, plead, or try to compete with some art instructor who probably lived off trust fund money and romantic gestures. I was going to prepare for war. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since my early days at Meridian. I made a backup plan. The next morning, I did what any seasoned procurement director would do when facing a potential vendor betrayal. I started gathering intelligence. Alara had already left for her morning yoga class, or at least that's what she called it these days. I had my doubts about how much actual yoga was happening. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared cloud storage account. Alara wasn't particularly tech-savvy, which meant she never bothered to check what got automatically backed up from her phone. Photos, messages, location data. It was all there, cataloged like evidence in a federal investigation. The photos folder told a story Alara probably didn't realize she was writing. There they were, pictures from the past 6 months that painted a timeline I'd been too busy to notice. Alara and Marc of various coffee shops, art galleries, and restaurants. Always sitting just a little too close, her hand touching his arm, both of them looking at each other instead of the camera. But it was the metadata that really got my attention. The timestamps showed these weren't random encounters. They were meeting twice a week, sometimes 3 times, always when she told me she was doing something else. The locations were consistent, too. The same wine bar downtown, the same park where she claimed to go jogging alone. Then I found a folder labeled Art Projects. Inside were photos that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with what Alara was really working on. Pictures of Marc's apartment, his car, even shots of them together that she'd clearly taken for her own private collection. One photo showed them on his couch, her head on his shoulder, both looking relaxed and intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. I heard Alara's key in the lock and quickly closed the laptop. She walked in carrying her yoga mat, face flushed, looking more energetic than she had in months. "How was class?" I asked. "Oh, you know how it is," Alara said, avoiding eye contact, challenging poses today. "I'm getting better at the difficult positions." I bet she was. "I've been thinking about your Napa trip," I said casually. "Maybe I should meet this Mark character. You know, shake hands with the man who's teaching my wife so much about art." Alara's face went pale for just a second before she forced a smile. "Julian, that's sweet, but Mark values the artistic process. He doesn't really do the husband meeting thing. It might throw off the group dynamic." "Group dynamic, right? Well, maybe you could show me some of your recent artwork then," I suggested. "I'd love to see what you've been creating with all this inspiration." The silence stretched between us like a cable about to snap. Alara sat down her yoga mat and headed toward the kitchen. "I'm still working on my current piece," she called over her shoulder. "It's not ready to be seen yet." That evening, I made a call to Henri Vidal, a private investigator I'd worked with during some corporate security issues at Meridian. Henri was thorough, discreet, and expensive. Exactly what I needed. "Julian Beaumont," I said when he answered, "I need your services again. Personal matter this time." "What kind of personal matter?" Henri asked. "The kind that requires documentation and might end up in court." Henry's chuckle was dry. "Understood. When do you want to start?" "Yesterday would have been good. Tomorrow will have to do." By the time Alara returned from another art class the following evening, Henri had already positioned himself with a clear view of Mark's apartment building. Within 48 hours, I'd have photographs, timestamps, and enough evidence to bury Alara's lie deeper than a failed defense contract. Henry's first report arrived on Thursday morning, delivered to my office at Meridian like any other business document. The photos were professionally shot and devastatingly clear. Alara and Mark entering his apartment building together. Alara leaving 3 hours later, hair disheveled, clothes wrinkled. Mark kissing her goodbye in a parking garage where they thought no one could see them. But Henri had included something unexpected in his report. A background check on Mark Riviere that made my blood boil. The man wasn't just an art instructor. He was a con artist with a history of targeting wealthy married women. 3 previous relationships with wives of successful businessmen, all ending when the husbands discovered what was happening. Mark had a pattern and Alara was just his latest mark. That evening, I made a decision that would have shocked my procurement team. I call my brother. Most people don't know I have a twin brother. Damien Beaumont lives in Seattle, works as a corporate restructuring specialist, and we've maintained careful distance since our father's death 5 years ago. But Damien and I share more than DNA. We share the exact same face, the same voice, the same build. The only difference is Damien's scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. "Julian," Damien said when. He answered, "This is unexpected." "I need a favor," I said. "The kind that requires your particular skills and our unique family resemblance." Damien specialized in corporate takeovers, which meant he knew how to infiltrate organizations, gather intelligence, and execute complex strategic plans. He also owed me a significant favor from when I'd helped finance his divorce settlement 3 years earlier. "What kind of favor?" Damien asked. "My wife is cheating with a professional con man. I need someone to get close to him, find out his next move, and gather evidence that will destroy both of them in court." The line went quiet for a moment. "You want me to pretend to be you?" "No," I said. "I want you to be yourself, but I want Mark to think he's dealing with a different Beaumont brother, someone with even more money and connections than I have." Damien's laugh was cold. "Corporate espionage tactics applied to domestic warfare. I like it." Within 48 hours, Damien was in town, posing as a wealthy investor interested in Mark's art program. His plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Infiltrate Mark's social circle, document his methods, and potentially record him bragging about his conquest of my wife. Meanwhile, I continued my regular routine, giving Alara no indication that I knew about her affair. When she mentioned her upcoming Napa retreat, I even offered to pay for spa treatments. "That's so generous, Julian," Alara said, practically glowing. "Mark will be so impressed by your thoughtfulness." "I'm sure he will be," I replied, knowing that by the time Mark met my brother, his opinion of the whole Beaumont family would change dramatically. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. While Damien worked his magic infiltrating Mark's circle, I focused on what I did best, managing assets and controlling financial flow. 25 years of handling multi-million-dollar procurement budgets had taught me exactly how to move money without raising flags. The first step was activating the trust fund I'd established when Chloe turned 18. Most couples put their assets in joint accounts, but I'd learned from watching too many colleagues get destroyed in divorces. Our house, investments, and business interests were structured through a complex web of trusts and LLCs that Alara had signed without reading the fine print. Chloe drove down from Sacramento that weekend, ostensibly for her birthday celebration, but really for an emergency financial briefing. "Papa, what's going on?" Chloe asked as we sat in my home office. "Your message sounded serious." I handed her the folder containing Henry's photos and Damien's preliminary intelligence report. Chloe studied them with the same methodical approach she used for software development projects. "Man's having an affair," she said finally. It wasn't a question with a man who's done this before. I replied multiple times. "Your mother isn't his first target, and she won't be his last unless we stop him." Chloe closed the folder and looked directly at me. "What do you need me to do?" "Legally, you're now the primary beneficiary of the family trust. The house transfers to you along with 60% of our investment portfolio. Your mother will be left with what she brought into the marriage plus whatever the court decides is fair. And if she fights it," I smiled. "That's where Uncle Damien comes in. By the time he's finished gathering evidence, your mother won't have a legal leg to stand on." Chloe nodded slowly. "Does she know any of this is happening?" "She's too busy planning her romantic getaway to notice her world is being restructured around her." That evening, Alara came home late again, claiming she'd been at a gallery opening with Mark's art group. She seemed distracted, almost giddy, and I realized she was probably planning to tell me about Napa soon. The lies were getting harder for her to maintain, which meant she was getting ready to force a confrontation. Perfect. I prefer to fight battles on ground of my own, choosing with weapons my opponent didn't know I possessed. Henri called that night with an update. "Your brother is impressive," he said. "He's got Mark believing he's interested in investing in some kind of art retreat center. Mark's already bragging about his successful track record with lonely wives and asking for advice on how to extract maximum financial benefit from his current situation. Is he recording these conversations? Everything. Video, audio, documentation. Your wife's boyfriend is about to confess his entire operation to someone he thinks is a potential business partner." I hung up the phone and poured myself a scotch. In 48 hours, Alara would leave for Napa, thinking she was starting a new chapter of her life. Instead, she'd be walking directly into the closing chapter of the biggest mistake she'd ever made. Damien's intelligence operation exceeded my expectations. Within 3 days, he positioned himself as Mark's potential business partner and recorded enough evidence to destroy both Mark and Alara in any courtroom. But Damien had also suggested something that appealed to my sense of poetic justice. Mark's been bragging about his success rate with wealthy wives. Damien told me over dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. He thinks he's untouchable because these women are too embarrassed to expose him publicly, but he's never dealt with someone who fights back strategically. "What are you proposing?" Damien smiled. "A final performance. Something that will shatter Alara's fantasy and expose Mark's true nature simultaneously." The plan was elegant. Damien would arrange a meeting with Mark at the same restaurant where Alara and Mark had their romantic dinners. Damien would present himself as a successful investor interested in Mark's relationship consulting business, essentially his con operation. The meeting would be recorded and Damien would get Mark to admit his entire scheme on camera. Meanwhile, I would execute the Bentley operation. The Bentley had been sitting in my garage for 2 years, a luxury purchase I had made during a particularly profitable quarter at Meridian. Alara had loved it initially, posting photos of herself with the car on social media. But when I'd suggested she learn to drive it properly, she'd lost interest. "Too complicated," she'd said. "Too much responsibility. Perfect symbolism for our marriage." Henri would position the Bentley in Alara's reserve parking space at our condo complex, not blocking it, but occupying it completely. When Alara returned from her art class, really another afternoon with Mark, she'd find her space taken by a car that represented everything she'd thrown away. But the real genius was Henri himself. At 31, he looked successful, confident, and mysterious. He'd stand beside the Bentley like he owned both the car and the space, creating the impression that I'd moved on to bigger and better things while she was slumming with the con artist. "This is psychological warfare," Chloe said when I explained the plan. "You're making her realize what she's losing." "I'm making her face reality," I corrected. "Mark is using her. I built something real, and she's throwing it away for fantasy." The timing had to be perfect. Damien's meeting with Mark was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Alara's return from her latest art session was predictably around 5 o'clock. Henri would be in position by 4:30, giving Alara just enough time to see the Bentley and wonder who was driving her husband's car before the real revelation began. Wednesday night, Alara was unusually affectionate, probably feeling guilty about her upcoming weekend in Napa. She cooked my favorite dinner and even suggested watching a movie together. "Julian," she said during dinner, "I know things have been tense between us lately. Maybe when I get back from the retreat, we could take a vacation together, just the two of us." I looked at my wife of 28 years and felt nothing but sadness. She was still trying to have it both ways. Keep her stable marriage while pursuing her exciting affair. She had no idea that by Sunday evening, she'd have neither. "That sounds nice, Alara," I said. "We should definitely talk about our future when you get back." Thursday afternoon arrived with the precision of a military operation. Damien texted me at 3:15 p.m. Target acquired. Recording in progress. Henri confirmed his position at 4:20 p.m. Bentley positioned. Standing by. I was in my office at Meridian reviewing quarterly procurement reports and maintaining perfect normally while my carefully orchestrated plan executed itself across town. To my colleagues, it was just another Thursday. They had no idea their procurement director was simultaneously dismantling his wife's affair and rebuilding his family's future. At 4:45 p.m., Henri sent a photo. Alara's Honda was approaching the parking garage, and he was standing beside the Bentley looking like he belonged there. The psychological impact would be immediate and devastating. At 5:02 p.m., Damien called. "It's done," he said simply. "Mark confessed everything on camera. The man's a complete sociopath, Julian." He described Alara as financially promising, but emotionally needy. He's planning to string her along until he can access her accounts, then disappear to Costa Rica with whatever he can steal. Did he mention the other women? 3 of them. Alara's not even his primary target. There's a doctor's wife in Phoenix who's apparently funding most of his lifestyle. I felt a strange mix of vindication and disgust. Alara had destroyed our marriage for a man who saw her as nothing more than a secondary income source. Henri called at 5:18 p.m. She saw the car, stood there for about 5 minutes, just staring. I could see her trying to figure out who I was and why I had access to your Bentley. "She's inside the building now, probably calling you." My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Alara's number. "Julian." Her voice was tight with confusion and anger. "There's someone in my parking space with your car." "Who is he?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said calmly. "My car is in the garage at work where it always is." "Julian, I'm looking at the Bentley right now. There's a man standing next to it like he owns it. Maybe you should ask him who he is." "I'm asking you." "Alara, I'm in a meeting. We'll talk when I get home." I hung up and smiled. Phase 1 was complete. Alara was off balance, confused, and beginning to realize that things weren't as simple as she'd assumed. Tonight, when she tried to call Mark for comfort, she'd discover he wasn't answering his phone. Damien would make sure of that. By tomorrow morning, Alara would understand that her fantasy weekend in Napa had become the opening move in a chess game she was destined to lose. Friday morning, Alara packed for Napa with the enthusiasm of someone heading to her own execution. She didn't know Damien had already exposed Mark's operation or that Henri had documented enough evidence to destroy her credibility in any divorce proceeding. She thought she was escaping to romance. Instead, she was walking into a trap. "Julian, I'll call you when I get there, Alara said, avoiding eye contact as she loaded her suitcase in her Honda. Take your time, I replied. Enjoy your retreat. She drove away at 9:15 a.m., still believing she was in control of her destiny. By 10 a.m., Henri was positioned outside Mark's apartment building. By noon, Damien had Mark sitting in a restaurant confessing his entire operation to hidden cameras. The Beaumont woman is perfect, Mark told Damien, thinking he was speaking to a potential business partner. Married to money, emotionally vulnerable, and stupid enough to think this is about love. I'll have access to her accounts within a month. Damien's recording captured everything. Mark's confession about multiple affairs, his plans to drain Alara's finances, even his backup strategy if I discovered the affair. The man had contingencies for everything except someone like Damien infiltrating his operation. At 4 p.m., Alara called from Napa. Julian, something's wrong. Her voice was shaky. Mark's not here. The retreat is supposed to start tonight, but the hotel says there's no group reservation. No one knows anything about an art retreat. That's strange, I said. Calmly. Maybe there was a miscommunication. I've been calling Mark all day. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Julian, what if something happened to him? I'm sure he's fine, Alara. Maybe check with the art studio where you take classes. But Alara had already called the studio. There was no Mark Riviere on their instructor roster. Never had been. The man she'd been having an affair with for 6 months had been using a fake identity and a fabricated connection to the art world. Saturday morning, Alara drove home in silence. No phone calls, no texts, just 8 hours of interstate highway giving her time to realize how completely she'd been played. Mark had vanished like smoke, taking her dignity and her marriage with him. Henri was waiting when she arrived. Not in the Bentley this time, but standing beside a moving truck parked outside our condo building. Men in uniforms were loading boxes and furniture, all marked with tags indicating my name and new destination. Alara parked and stared at the scene like someone witnessing an accident. Everything that belonged to me was being systematically removed from our shared life. The antique desk from my father. The wine collection I've been building for 20 years. Even the tools from the garage. Excuse me. Alara called to Henri. What's going on here? Henri looked at her with professional courtesy. Asset relocation. Ma'am, Mr. Beaumont is establishing a new residence. A new residence? Where? I'm not authorized to discuss Mr. Beaumont's personal arrangements. Alara pulled out her phone and called me. I was in my office at Meridian, finalizing the last details of my separation strategy. Julian, there are movers at our condo. They're taking your things. What's happening? I'm relocating some assets to a more secure location. I said, after your weekend revelation, I decided it was time to make some changes. What weekend revelation, Julian? Mark disappeared. The whole retreat was a lie. I know. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Alara was finally beginning to understand that while she'd been playing games, I've been playing chess. We need to talk, she whispered. Yes, I agreed. We do. Sunday evening, Alara sat across from me at our kitchen table like a defendant, waiting for sentencing. The confident woman who'd mocked my warnings had been replaced by someone who looked fragile and lost. Between us laid Damien's recordings, Henry's surveillance photos, and legal documents that would reshape our future. Julian, I made a mistake. Alara began. Mark was using me. I can see that now, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. Rebuild trust. I pressed play on Damien's recording. Mark's voice filled the kitchen, describing Alara as financially promising but emotionally needy and detailing his plans to extract money from our accounts before disappearing to Costa Rica. Alara's face crumpled as she heard herself described like a mark in a confidence game. He said he loved me. She whispered. Mark Riviere isn't even his real name, I said. He's a professional con artist who targets wealthy men's wives. You were just his latest assignment. How long have you known? Long enough to protect our assets and gather evidence that will stand up in court. I slid a legal document across the table. Divorce papers. You can sign them voluntarily, or we can go to court and make this public. Your choice. Alara picked up the papers with trembling hands. This gives me almost nothing. It gives you what you brought into the marriage, plus what the court considers fair after documented adultery with a known criminal. That's more generous than you deserve. Our daughter Chloe knows everything. She supports my decision. She's also the new primary beneficiary of the family trust, which means you can't touch the assets you never actually contributed to. Anyway, Alara looked around the kitchen, probably noticing for the first time how empty it seemed without my personal belongings. Where will I live? That's your problem to solve. You wanted adventure and spontaneity. Now you get to experience both. Chloe walked into the kitchen carrying her own set of documents. Man, I need you to sign these transfer papers. The house is going into my name, and you have 30 days to find new accommodations. Chloe, honey, please don't do this. Your father is manipulating you. Chloe's voice was steady and cold. Papa, show me the evidence. Man, pictures, recordings, financial records. You threw away our family for a con artist who was planning to steal from us. This isn't manipulation. This is consequences. Alara signed the papers because she had no choice. Her fantasy had crumbled. Her lover had vanished. And the family she'd taken for granted was cutting her loose with surgical precision. As she packed her remaining belongings, I felt no satisfaction, no victory, just the quiet relief of a man who'd successfully defended what mattered most against someone who tried to destroy it. Alara moved out on Tuesday morning, driving away in the same Honda she'd taken to Napa, but this time heading toward a future she'd never planned for and couldn't control. The woman who'd thought she was too smart to be fooled had discovered that some games have professional players. 6 months after Alara moved out, I stood in the living room of my new house with Chloe and Damien, watching Henri install the final security system. The property was everything Alara had never appreciated. Understated elegance, strategic location, and bulletproof privacy. No social media staging opportunities, just solid construction and intelligent design. Papa, the trust paperwork is finalized, Chloe said, handing me a folder. Everything's properly protected now. Man can't touch any of it, even if she tries to challenge the divorce decree. Damien looked up from his laptop, where he was reviewing security footage from Mark's arrest. Speaking of Alara's boyfriend, he's facing federal charges in 3 states. The FBI used our recordings as primary evidence. He won't be scamming anyone for the next 15 years. Justice had been swift and thorough. Mark's criminal network had collapsed within weeks of Damien's investigation. Multiple wives had come forward with similar stories, and the federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using our evidence as the foundation. What about Alara? I asked. Living in a studio apartment downtown. Chloe reported without emotion. Working retail at a clothing store. She tried to contact me last month wanting to rebuild our relationship, but I told her actions have consequences that don't disappear because you finally understand them. My daughter had inherited my strategic mind, but possessed a clarity about relationships that I'd lacked at her age. She understood that forgiveness wasn't the same as restoration, and that some betrayals create permanent changes in family dynamics. Henri finished his installation and handed me the system controls. Everything's operational, Mr. Beaumont. Motion sensors, cameras, secure communications. Nobody gets close to this property without you knowing about it. Expecting trouble, Damien asked. Preventing it, I corrected. I've learned the value of preparation. That evening, I sat on my back deck overlooking the lake, drinking scotch, and reviewing procurement contracts for Meridian's next quarter. My life had found its rhythm again. Work that challenged me. Family relationships built on mutual respect and personal space that belonged entirely to me. Chloe joined me for dinner every Sunday. Damien visited monthly, usually with updates on new business ventures we were exploring together. Even Henri had become a friend rather than just a service provider, occasionally stopping by to discuss security innovations and share war stories from his investigative work. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Alara probably try a new approach to contact me. I deleted it without reading the message. Some doors once closed should stay that way. The man who'd spent 28 years trying to make someone else happy had discovered the satisfaction of building a life based on competence, loyalty, and clear boundaries. Alara had taught me an invaluable lesson. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is leave. 1 year later, I received an invitation that perfectly illustrated how completely my life had changed. Damien's company was acquiring Mark's former art studio property, and he wanted me to attend the closing ceremony. The building where Alara had pretended to take classes would become the headquarters for our new consulting firm. Poetic justice, Damien said as we toured the empty studios. The place where your marriage ended becomes the foundation for our business partnership. Chloe had joined us for the occasion, bringing architectural plans for renovating the space. She'd recently completed her project management certification and would oversee the transformation from artistic pretense to corporate efficiency. Papa, I found something interesting in the property records, Chloe said, handing me a document. Alara tried to buy this building 6 months ago. Her loan application was rejected for insufficient income and poor credit history. The irony was perfect. Alara had wanted to own the place where she'd fallen for a con artist lies, probably imagining some romantic scenario where she'd create an artistic sanctuary. Instead, the building would become a monument to strategic thinking and professional competence. Henri arrived with a final security assessment. Clean property, Mr. Beaumont. Mark's operation left no lasting security concerns. The building's ready for whatever you want to make it. That afternoon, I received a call from Meridian CEO offering me the position of Chief Procurement Officer with a 20% salary increase. The company valued my strategic thinking and wanted to expand my authority across multiple divisions. Julian, he said, your work this past year has been exceptional. You've streamlined our vendor relationships, eliminated cost overruns, and improved efficiency across the board. We want to build the next 5 years around your leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Alara had been chasing fantasy adventures, I've been building real success. Her betrayal had freed me from the energy drain of managing someone else's emotional chaos, allowing me to focus entirely on what I did best. Damien and I signed the partnership papers that evening, officially launching Beaumont Strategic Consulting. Our first client was already secured, a government contractor who needed procurement expertise for international defense projects. As I drove home to my lake house, I reflected on the journey from betrayal to reconstruction. Alara had thought she was discarding a boring, predictable man for exciting possibilities. Instead, she'd freed a strategic thinker who'd been constrained by trying to make an ungrateful partner happy. The woman who'd mocked my warnings and posted photos in another man's arms was now working retail to pay rent on a studio apartment. The man she thought was too dull for adventure had built a consulting empire and was planning international business expansion. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you are always capable of being once the right people get out of your way.